there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. I'm here at RAF Biggin Hill, one of the most famous airfields of the Second World War. Biggin on the Bump, as it was known, became synonymous with the Battle of Britain, the aerial campaign that thwarted Hitler's attempts at invasion back in the summer of 1940. The pilots that took off from this runway faced overwhelming odds, but in overcoming them, they wrote themselves into the history books.
21 threshold QFE 978. We're on runway 03.
The geography here at Biggin Hill ensured the creation of an airfield back in 1917 towards the end of the First World War, and its unique characteristics have meant that nearly a century later it's still a very busy place.
2, 3.
That is correct. Next report ready to taxi.
Bob, very nice to see you, sir.
Hello.
Admiring an airfield that you have studied for years.
Yes, I have.
So tell us, why was Biggin Hill founded here?
It started life as a wireless testing station, and they came across this field here, 80 acres, absolutely massive. It was 650 feet above sea level, but it was a perfect place. And they perfected communication between aircraft in flight and the ground through this amazing new technology.
Hence, Biggin on the Bump.
Biggin on the Bump, an upturned saucepan. But as they came into land, there was a little hill, and they used to stick their noses in the air over the other side, and it became known as the Bump.
And I guess its role in the First World War really was the kind of precursor to the Second World War, when Biggin Hill really does earn its wings, as it were.
Well, it soon became a senior sector airfield. It became the most famous fighter station, not only in the country, but in the world. More than 1,400 enemy aircraft shot down. There was a ring of fighter stations around London, but this was the strongest link defending the southern approaches.
In the late 1920s and early 1930s, Biggin Hill was given a much-needed revamp, the provision of new hangars and these E-pens to protect aircraft and their ground crews against the possibility of air attack. And all of that, of course, was just as well, because the clouds were gathering over Europe as war loomed on the horizon.
In 1935, news reached Britain that Hitler was rumoured to have a death ray, using radio waves to destroy towns and cities. So the Aeronautical Research Committee asked radio engineer Robert Watson-Watt to explore creating a death ray for Britain, specifically to be used against aircraft. Watson-Watt quickly proved the death ray idea to be impossible and suggested that perhaps radio waves might be of more use in detecting and tracking enemy aircraft.
5-1 uniform Bravo, Lufthansa 428, turn right, resume your own navigation to position Tendo and then NATO.
At its most simple terms, the primary radar works by emitting a large pulse of radio energy. It bounces off the metal in the aircraft and it returns to the radar sensor. Because we know how long that takes to happen and we know which direction the signal was being aimed, we can tell the range of the aircraft and how far it is away from the radar head. That then developed even further so that we can interrogate the flight management computer for certain data, and we can now tell the intended heading of the aircraft and its selected flight level. That in itself provides a huge safety benefit to us because we can automatically check that against the clearance we provided the aircraft so that we can take early intervention if it's necessary.
Today, the National Air Traffic Services, known as NATS, control the UK's radar system. They handle over 2 million flights a year and over 220 million passengers in UK airspace, controlling both civil and military aircraft.
If we didn't have radar, we really are reliant on the aircraft to report their position, and really with the number of aircraft that we have to maintain and keep in the air at any one point in time, that just wouldn't be a practical way, and there would just be so many delays, it would be truly awful.
But back in the 1930s, radar was in its infancy, and RAF Biggin Hill needed all the help it could get defending London against the approaching Germans. The terrifying effectiveness of the German Air Force had become all too apparent during the Spanish Civil War. And here in Britain, there is a renewed urgency to put this new technology to good use. Between 1937 and 1939, radio masts, just like the one behind me, were put up all along Britain's coastline. It was the world's first air defence system. They called it Chain Home.
Well, Andy, it is amazing what you find lying around the Essex countryside.
Absolutely, Jules. You find all kinds of different things, including a 360-foot radar tower.
And where was this one originally sighted?
It came from Canooden, which is near Southend, about 25 miles from where we stand now.
Well, the best view of it's got to be from over there, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Well, Andy, there's no getting away from the impressive nature of the Chain Home array. But just exactly what was it and how did it work?
Chain Home was the United Kingdom's air defence radar system in the Second World War. It was designed and developed during the middle to late 1930s, and the original station would have consisted of 3 or 4 of these huge 360-foot towers, separated by about 100 feet. And between them, between the cantilevered platforms, would have been slung wire antenna arrays. So the whole of the east coast of the UK was pinpointed with these antennas all the way along. Somewhere beyond us over there would have been 4 wooden towers, 240 foot high, and they held the receive dipoles. This was a pulse system, so a pulse of RF would be transmitted from one of the curtain arrays slung between the transmit towers, and it would floodlight the area in front of the radar, up to 200 miles away. And then the receivers would pick up the very, very tiny signal that's been re-radiated, reflected from the target.
So it gave a sense of direction and height?
It gave direction and height, yes, and it meant that we could scramble our aircraft and they could be in the right place at the right time.
Could it tell you how many aircraft were in the air?
Not on its own, but a trained operator could be able to have a good estimate of the number of aircraft by looking at the size of the return signal.
Its great champion was Dowding. Tell us about the Dowding system.
Well, what Dowding did was he looked at the problems of air defence as a whole. So the whole system of air defence, from the anti-aircraft guns to the searchlights, was all integrated into this whole Dowding system, which meant nothing worked on its own. It was all, if you like, orchestrated from a central place.
The Dowding system was the key instrument of war in Fighter Command's armoury, denied the enemy the element of surprise. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding developed a series of reporting chains. Information was sent from the chain home to Fighter Command, who would then in turn relay details to the operations sectors like Biggin Hill. They would then scramble the airfields and the squadrons.
Now, these do look like pretty juicy targets for the Luftwaffe. How many of these stations were destroyed and attacked?
Well, they did try and destroy them, but they're mostly air. So bombs landing, other than a direct hit, did very little damage. Not until the middle of the war did they even realise that it was a radar system.
When we think of the Battle of Britain, we tend to, of course, focus on the famous few that Churchill describes, the fighter pilots. But actually, it's the backroom boys who came up with systems like this that we really have to thank.
That's right. I mean, the fighter pilots wouldn't have been in the right place had it have not been for radar, because we were so outnumbered. Without Chain Home, we would almost certainly have lost the Battle of Britain.
Before World War II, interception rates of 30 to 50% were considered excellent. Now, with the Dowding system in place, fighter command achieved well over 80%. Without Chain Home, Biggin Hill's organised defence of London would have been virtually impossible.
The effective development and implementation of radar could not have come soon enough. Hitler's invasion of Europe had proved to be a resounding success, and his next objective was to knock Britain out of the war.
When in 1940 it became evident that Churchill wouldn't surrender, Hitler tasked his military to draw up plans for an invasion of the UK. What they came up with was codenamed Operation Sea Lion.
There was a great deal of optimism in the higher echelons of the German armed forces that a successful invasion of Britain could take place, especially in the army and in the air force, the Luftwaffe. But there was a greater reluctance to mount an invasion by the German Navy. Grand Admiral Raeder, the Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, realised that because most of his surface fleet had been destroyed or knocked out during the Norwegian campaign that had been fought between April and June 1940, he was very worried that the Navy wouldn't be able to escort the invading forces over the Channel successfully.
By August 1940, a large number of vessels, including 2,000 barges, had been assembled on the Belgian and French coasts. But to launch an invasion on Britain, Hitler needed to control the English Channel. To do this, Germany needed control of the air, and that meant taking on the Royal Air Force.
The Germans were going to use 13 divisions in the initial assault on southern Britain, the objective being London, of course, and eventually the invading force would have totaled 39 divisions, including 15 to 17,000 men, but also including 3 panzer divisions in the initial assault, each of which had about 250 tanks. So it was quite a formidable force. I mean, the British, one must remember, had lost a lot of equipment in France. The men had come back with their rifles, but very little else. A lot of guns, tanks had been left behind. And Britain was really very, very denuded of armaments.
Hitler's air force entered the battle with around 1,300 bombers and dive bombers and about 900 single-engine and 300 twin-engine fighters. Significantly more than the 600 that RAF Fighter Command had available at the time.
The Germans had a very healthy respect for the Royal Air Force, and they realised that the full resources of the Royal Air Force hadn't been thrown into the Battle of France, as the French government pleaded with Churchill to do so, because Churchill was very conscious of the fact that the Royal Air Force Fighter Command was needed to defend Britain. Hitler says in his directive that it was vital that the German Air Force destroys the English Air Force, and he calls it the English Air Force, not the Royal Air Force. It was vital to knock the RAF out.
By July 1940, the stage was set for the first major campaign between 2 rival air forces. Now, the Germans, of course, had their bomber fleet and the highly regarded Me-109 Messerschmitt fighter, but in some regards, well, the RAF held all the aces. 2 aircraft that would become synonymous with the exploits during the Battle of Britain, the Hurricane and the Spitfire. Well done, Paul. Well, you know, my day just gets better and better. Look at it. We're on Biggin Hill Airfield. We've got 3 beautiful aircraft to look at. The Hurricane, of course, and these 2 Spitfires. I mean, this really is the story of Biggin Hill, this aircraft.
It is, yeah, it's iconic. I mean, Biggin Hill's an iconic airfield, but the Spitfire is really the icon of the Battle of Britain, if you like.
Well, come on, show me round. I can't wait to get up close. The design of it, these elliptical wings, very much an icon, again, of the period of the 1930s, and yet have produced the most beautiful aeroplane.
Well, that's the real thing about this. It's an iconic shape, but it's really just practicality. It was the most efficient shape they knew of at the time, and Mitchell, who designed it, said, I don't care what shape it is as long as it covers the guns.
Little did he know he was creating not just a design icon and a beautiful aircraft, but a war-winning solution. When I talk to pilots who flew these during the war, they say it was really an extension, if you like, of themselves.
Oh yeah, many pilots have commented that you used to strap the aeroplane on like you were wearing it. And you go off and fight. You're not even conscious of the aeroplane when you're fighting with it. Fingertip movements on the controls, it's so responsive. You think about turning, it's already turning for you. For me, the shape of this aeroplane is so beautiful that we'd already won the war on style. You know, with aeroplanes that looked and sounded like this, we couldn't have lost.
When you talk about sound, that of course comes from the famous Merlin engine, and there's a beautiful example of it just over here, all uncovered for us. It's a ludicrously complicated looking thing. How did that compare to the enemy machines, the Messerschmitt in particular?
The Messerschmitt was a little bit faster in level flight, at a better rate of climb and a steeper climb angle, so it could get itself out of trouble. But it also had the technique of diving. A Messerschmitt could dive away from a Spitfire. The Spitfire trying to pursue would cough and cut out because of the design of the carburettor.
Was that ever overcome?
It was overcome in a way, actually a very simple device, like a washer that was inserted in the carburettor, stopped all the fuel moving to the other side of the float chamber. That was a temporary solution.
But many pilots talked about the manoeuvrability of the Spitfire over the Messerschmitt. What was it about the Spitfire that gave it that edge?
It was slightly more manoeuvrable than the 109, certainly. It was a very complicated machine, but very advanced.
The first prototype of the Supermarine Spitfire flew in 1936, and it was placed into production in 1938. At the outset of the Battle of Britain, only 19 squadrons had Spitfires compared to 30 armed with Hurricanes. The Supermarine's elliptical wing design made it fast and manoeuvrable in a dogfight. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine gave it a speed of over 350 miles an hour. It had a wingspan of over 36 feet and a maximum speed of 408 miles an hour. Its firepower developed from 8 Browning machine guns to 4 powerful 20mm cannons. Overall, the Spitfire squadrons were responsible for shooting down 521 enemy aircraft, an average of 27 per squadron.
Well, we've talked about that sense that pilots could virtually wear their aircraft. I know we're not going to get a chance to fly in one today, which I would love to do, but can I have a sit in the side?
Certainly can.
Which one? This one?
This one over here.
I have been looking forward to this for a long time.
You've already got the Spitfire grin, you're not even in it.
Ah, you see? The Spitfire grin.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's a given. This is just beautiful. What's the best way?
The way to get in is to hold onto the armour plate here and the windscreen frame that you've got there.
Yep.
Stand on this ledge and then stand on the seat.
OK, here we go. My first dive into a Spitfire. And then just pop my feet in.
That's it, yeah, put your feet down there where the rudder pedals are.
Oh, you talk about that Spitfire grin. It's a glow that kind of flows through you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it happens to just about everyone their first time, and their second time, and their third time.
Now, you've been involved in restoring these aircraft for many years, Paul. How many man-hours did it take to build one?
To build one originally, just over 15,000 man-hours.
15,000? And keeping them in the air, in particular at stations like this one at Biggin Hill, which were under such heavy attack during those heady days of the Battle of Britain, must have been an uphill battle.
It was a round-the-clock process. They never stopped. And you'd always get the chief engineer on the squadron saying, I want these serviceable for tomorrow morning.
Regardless?
Yeah.
Regardless.
And they'd move heaven and earth to get as many aeroplanes up as possible.
But of course the Spitfire, although the icon of the Battle of Britain, was outnumbered, not by the enemy in many respects, but by the Hurricane. More Hurricanes flew in the Battle of Britain than almost any other aircraft.
It's true, yeah, there were more Hurricanes. In fact, 2/3 of the fighter force were Hurricanes. Correspondingly, they got more kills than the Spitfire. They were sent after the bombers in a lot of cases because they were very good for shooting with, very stable, and could take a lot of punishment because they were fabric construction down the back of the fuselage especially.
Now I'm going to chance my luck today. I've already had a chance to get into a Spitfire. Can we have a look at that Hurricane too?
Certainly can.
The first prototype of the Hawker Hurricane was introduced in 1935 and went into production in 1937. It was the first single-wing or monoplane RAF fighter, and in total 14,583 were manufactured. With a wingspan of 40 foot and a Rolls-Royce Merlin 3 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine, it was the first RAF aircraft capable of a top speed in excess of 300 miles an hour. The fighter plane carried an armoury of 8 Browning machine guns mounted in its wings. Although largely overshadowed by the Spitfire, it's estimated that its pilots were credited with 58% of all enemy aircraft destroyed, an average of 53 per squadron.
So this is your Hurricane?
This is a Hurricane, and everywhere you look on a Hurricane, it's chunky. It's got a great big thick wing, which made it very stable for shooting.
And I love this characteristic ribbing almost. It's this wonderful fusion between the newer technology at the front and the older timber and canvas at the back.
It is a bit of a mixture. I mean, the engine's the same as the Spitfire engine, but apart from that, it's pre-war technology. It's like a biplane almost.
But how robust were these up against the German aircraft?
These were very robust, but the key to this is a bullet would go straight through, hopefully, without hitting anything important on its journey. And you could easily repair that by just letting a patch in.
Ah, yeah.
Didn't have to rivet or cut metal. You literally just dope a patch on.
And there was quite an important equation between fighters being built and fighters being lost. How quick were these to make compared to a Spitfire?
They were, you could shave a third of the time off. They were about 10,000 hours to build.
Really?
Mm.
It's hard to believe that these were somehow perceived as less glamorous than the Spitfire, given the job they were doing.
They're not as glamorous, you know, they're fabric and wood, and, you know, they don't get the blood racing like a Spitfire does unless you're actually flying one. But one of them has to get the glamour, one of them has to do the work, and it's the Hurricane that's the workhorse, shall we say.
If you had to choose between the two, what's your favourite?
Well, I'm a Spitfire junkie, so the heart rules the head on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess, I'm going to put my colours on the Hurricane mast. I love them. I love their squat shape, and I love the fact that they were the underdog in a way in technological terms, but they were the backbone of the fighter force then. But either or, I'd have one for Christmas, wouldn't you?
Couldn't have done without either of them.
Spectacular though these planes are, the experience must have been terrifying. With the gun button set to fire, it was every man for himself. With your own personal survival and the fate of your country at risk, the stakes were high.
Now, the main objective of those Luftwaffe raids was to knock the RAF out of the war, and until it was defeated, Hitler's planned invasion would be all but impossible. Biggin Hill itself was attacked numerous times throughout August and September of 1940, leaving the airfield pretty much devastated, but it never shut. And it's against that backdrop that ground crews worked tirelessly day and night, not just to keep the RAF in the air, but importantly to keep Britain in the war.
The members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or WAFs as they were known, played a vital role in fighter command during the battle. They used the huge chain-home radars to locate air raids and report their positions, as well as plotting these reports in the control rooms.
We're here in the Battle of Britain bunker at RAF Uxbridge. We are 60 feet underground, and this is where the Battle of Britain was operated from, was controlled. Around this table you would have had up to 20 members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force receiving information about incoming bombers, plotting it on this map in front of us, and then helping the other RAF bases to scramble fighters to intercept those incoming bombers. The Battle of Britain really was the first point at which we were truly tested as a service, and as such, if we were going to have any chance of defending against incoming attacks, then as many men standing in this room as possible had to be flying. And if that was going to be the case, then we simply had to substitute women for men in these roles. So by the summer of 1940, there would have been 20 Women's Auxiliary Air Force members standing around this table doing the jobs that only months earlier men would have been doing.
200 women worked at Biggin Hill. Their roles varied from catering and washing pilots' clothes to the more technical side of radar operations and servicing aircraft.
Of course, very quickly, women proved that they were more than capable of holding their tongues, of maintaining their cool under the most intense pressure, even to the extent that 3 WAF who worked at Biggin Hill were awarded the military medal, 3 of only 6 in the whole of the war, for holding to their posts under fire when Biggin Hill became the centre of a Luftwaffe attack. One such WAF, Elizabeth Mortimer, was serving at Biggin Hill. She was operating the telephones and came under direct fire on the night of the 31st of August into the 1st of September in particular, and she held to her post. And then, having finished her shift, she decided that in order to warn the returning aircrew that there might be unexploded bombs, she would run around the airfield, finding where she thought those unexploded bombs might be and marking the sites with a red flag. At one point, a bomb exploded so close to her that she was blown off her feet and actually remained deaf in one ear pretty much for the rest of her life. But she got up, dusted herself down and continued planting her red flags, putting to bed the idea that women might buckle under pressure or not be sufficiently brave to work in this sort of context.
Biggin Hill was one of the first targets in the Luftwaffe raids. Between August 1940 and January 1941, the airfield was attacked 12 times, destroying barracks and workshops and killing 39 people.
We did see a real revolution, albeit a small and ongoing revolution, if you like, in the way that women were perceived as a result of the way in which they played their part in this room and others around the country, doing these sorts of roles at a time when there was simply nothing else to be done but to get on with it.
While the ground crews were busy patching up the heavily damaged airfields, the pilots were trying to shoot down as many enemy bombers as possible before they reached the targets. But whether you were flying a Spitfire or a Hurricane, you were completely reliant on the 8 303 Browning machine guns that each aircraft carried. But just how effective were they? Well, I've come here to this rather spooky facility to find out. Dave.
Jules.
Hello, mate. This is an extraordinary place. I was told I'd find you in here, but it's a labyrinth.
It is, yeah, it's quite a big complex.
And you've got the facilities to test more or less any kind of weapon.
Yeah, we certainly test a lot of small arms here anyway.
And that's the range. How long is that?
The range is over 200 metres long.
Wow. Now, what have we got at the end of it?
At the end of the range, you can see Messerschmitt armour. It's a representation of 5mm, 8mm and 12mm armour. 5mm on the wing spars, 8mm on the pilot protection area, and then 12mm on the bulkhead.
Now, we've got two fascinating looking weapons here. That I recognise as a Bren gun.
Yep.
303?
Yes.
What are we going to do with that?
The Bren gun's going to stand in for the 303 aircraft, because the problem with the Browning 303 aircraft machine gun is it's air operated, fired remotely with a trigger on the control column of the spade grip. And so to make life easier, we're going to set it up in a tripod.
And next to it, you've got a 50 calibre Browning.
During the war, all our 50 calibre Brownings that we actually placed on the latter Spitfires, they were all manufactured in the US.
And I suppose in many ways, any student of the Battle of Britain will recognise that the 303 Browning was a key component, but just how good was it?
It was a very good, reliable machine gun. From the early days when they ironed out the development from the American one and made the British Browning machine gun, it was very, very good. Its only problem was the Germans are up-armoured and they'd already got a more powerful machine gun in their own aircraft, and that was its limitation.
So was the Messerschmitt 110 better armed than a Spitfire or a Hurricane during the Battle of Britain?
It was, yeah. It was better armed. The pilot had better armour, and the aircraft overall had more armour than the Spitfire, or the Hurricane for that matter. So, really and truly, the 303 really had to do a lot of work, whereas the German aircraft, with their cannons and machine gun, had to do a lot less.
So the idea is to see whether or not the 303 can get through any or all of those armour.
That's right, yeah.
How many rounds have we got?
We've got quite a few.
Excellent. Well, this will be a really interesting test to see how effective it was.
With the tracer element at this range, we should see some good tracer element going down.
Right then. Let's see how our Bren gun fares. Right, where's your helmet?
It's over here.
Gun is cocked and live.
It's ready to go, Jules. Yeah.
Okay.
If you just get behind it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm ready to fire.
In your own time, go on.
Oh, there's certainly a little spark at the end. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's one.
That certainly hit.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. And keep going at that, Jules.
Round's complete. Dave, absolutely fascinating.
Well done, you hit the target.
There's not a huge kick of that. You get the sense that there isn't a lot of weight behind the round.
Well, let's try something different. Let's try the 50 calibre machine gun.
Now, I'm used to seeing these mounted on the top of tanks or indeed in the wastes of flying fortresses and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. It was absolutely completely universal. The US Navy had them, the Air Force had them, they had them on tanks, they had them in the infantry role.
Yep.
And it's still in use today.
And this is the ammunition?
That's the ammunition. Now, if you compare that ammunition, that's exactly the same as it was at wartime. And this is the 303. So you're now looking at the size of that round compared to that round.
Yeah.
So when we put an explosive charge in the head, it's far more effective.
I never thought the day would ever come when I'd get the chance to actually fire a live 50 calibre. But today is my lucky day, Dave.
Today's your lucky day.
Right. Let's have a look and see what it does to the armoured plate.
OK, Jules, I'm just going to let the working parts forward, get it ready to load.
OK.
OK, so we'll just let the working parts forward, lock it off, and then what we're going to do is Matt will assist in the loading, I'll assist in watching where the rounds are going and making any adjustments we need to make. OK, load.
And to think this is a 1945 wartime dated weapon.
It is, yeah, absolutely. Goggles?
Thank you very much. Right.
OK, so we're going to cock it underhand. Yep.
Ah, got it.
There you go. OK, we're now loaded and we're now ready to fire.
Short bursts?
Short bursts, yep, absolutely.
Okay, here we go then.
And again.
That is a thump.
That is a thump. You've just taken over the targets.
Most of the targets?
Destroyed.
I think, is there one left on the right?
Yes, there is.
I think that cloud of smoke means we've got it.
Let's go and see what you actually have done.
It'd be fascinating to see, won't it? But you get a real idea of the power of this weapon. I mean, that's a real thump, a real thud coming right through your body.
You can feel the shockwave. You could actually feel it in the aircraft when you were firing the cannon and the 50 calibre.
That's incredible. And of course, here we are in the confines of this concrete range. The pressure wave, the shock wave, feels all the more. Right then, let's go and have a look. Wow. So this is still standing. That's rather disappointing, isn't it? Look at that. You can certainly see the 50 calibre hole.
Absolutely, yeah. You can actually see that quite clearly. If you look at that, you can really put your finger clearly through there. And you see the ones at the top. This is the tracer rounds that we had in there.
This is the 303 round.
This is the 303, and that's obviously the tracer round, which is a lighter round. And there you go. There's your armour piercing. So it's penetrated the wing spar armour. And certainly penetrated the wing spar armour with a 50 calibre.
There's absolutely no arguing with that.
No.
Is that the thickest plate?
This is the thickest plate. So, you know, we can see that there. It's just riddled with holes all the way through it.
I mean...
This is 12mm of frontal armour. So you can see there, that is gone all the way through, no problem at all.
I mean, never mind an aircraft, you can see what it would do to a lightly armoured tank as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, you read about this stuff, you study it, you talk to veterans, but when you see it for yourself firsthand, it's devastating, it's terrifying.
Shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And remember, all these holes come through, bits come flying off, you then got fragments and shards flying through the aircraft. You know, hundreds of miles an hour. Fingers?
Yeah. There it goes. Well, Dave, it's been an amazing day, a really fascinating insight into just what these pilots were up against, and importantly, what they were armed with and how the battle began to turn in our favour.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, to see how it all went round.
It really is. What a place. I'm glad I wasn't the other end of one of those, I can tell you.
Absolutely.
You know, much of wartime Biggin Hill has sadly disappeared, but this is a rare survivor. It's the original dispersal hut that pilots would have gathered in and around, playing cards, reading the paper, trying to relax as they waited for the call to scramble. And you have to wonder if they were listening to the radio here on the 20th of August 1940 when Churchill, speaking in the Commons, uttered those now immortal words.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
He was, of course, talking about them.
At the time Churchill made that speech, the battle was still raging and nowhere near won.
We're on the ridge where the observer post and a couple of guns were placed. The airfield is now through the trees. This, of course, was generally an open area opposite to the airfield. When I was a lad, this is where we came through and continued on further, and the position would have been somewhere just along on this ridge here. I'd managed to get into this area, which of course was very much an area that people were not allowed to come into, and it gave me the opportunity to see something which was really quite exceptional, I suppose. I didn't think that much of it in those days, but nowadays one would realise that you were in the front line of what was going on. The German aircraft appeared coming from the southeast, and they started then to bomb the airfield. I didn't feel frightened to any great extent. It was excitement at what was happening. This was boys' own stuff at its best, but of course it was a desperate time. And I think as the months rolled on and the Blitz started and we were bombed out of our house, 3 times they came along and repaired it, and 3 times we had to leave. You realise this wasn't just a game.
Both sides suffered heavy losses during the Battle of Britain. In just 17 weeks, nearly 1,900 Luftwaffe planes were destroyed, with over 2,600 casualties. The RAF lost over 1,100 aircraft and suffered over 800 casualties.
I got told off time and time again, but it was too exciting not to watch what was going on. But of course we were winning, you see, and when you saw a German aircraft fall away, you didn't think of the people who were in it, you just thought that's one less, and we were winning. We didn't realise the importance of Biggin Hill at that time, because Biggin Hill was really the last line of defence before London, and the aircraft from Biggin Hill were the ones that had to defend virtually London, and so it was a place of great significance.
The RAF's success in the Battle of Britain was indeed a turning point during the dark days of 1940. But it had given Hitler his first taste of defeat, and importantly, had provided Britain and her allies with a real sense of hope. But however welcome that victory, it had been bought at enormous personal cost.
Biggin Hill was given the nickname the strongest link for the role it played. However, countless others also did their part in thwarting the invasion. The Royal Observer Corps, the women of the WWII, the Blenheim bombers who destroyed the invasion barges, to name but a few. The chapel at Biggin Hill holds many memories.
This case contains Biggin Hill's Book of Remembrance, and it's inscribed with the names of all 454 aircrew who lost their lives throughout the war flying from here. It's currently opened on the 19th of July 1940, and it records the fate of too many of 141 Squadron who flew defiance during the Battle of Britain. Their rate of attrition was so high, following this day, the squadron pretty much ceased to exist. But every day, since the end of the war, a new page is turned, helping us to remember all of those who flew from here. Well, this is known as St George's Room here at the chapel at Biggin Hill, and it commemorates in these stained glass windows the ground crews that the pilots held in such high regard. This one is dedicated to ground control. Here we've got the WAFs leaning over a plotting table with a map of the south coast, and above them their controllers. And in these little panes, the radar masts, that key component that really helped in the Battle of Britain. And this one is dedicated to aircraft servicing. Ground crews, their aircraft and their pilots often had a very close relationship. Here we've got a crew working hard to keep this particular Spitfire in the air. Looks over under the careful eye of a sergeant. And then this one is dedicated to those who packed the parachutes. These really were people you'd want to depend on. You survived one of the riskiest jobs that the war could offer any young man. How did you do it?
I thank God, I suppose. I can't really say much more than that. Fortune was on your side, and you were very lucky, and you pick out fleeting glances, I think is the best way I can describe it. And sometimes it's the consequence of those fleeting glances which sticks in your mind. There are fleeting moments and it all happens very quickly.
You visit the chapel here at Biggin Hill regularly, Rodney. What does it mean to you?
I would hate to miss it. And obviously the day will come when I'll no longer be alive to enjoy it. But all the while I am, and I'm now 92 years of age, I'm very lucky to be able to enjoy it.
As 1940 developed, the fighter pilots came into their own in the public consciousness because of the Battle of Britain. And for all the horrors and dangers they faced, their life was often portrayed as glamorous. Did you ever see that? Did you ever recognise that? Did it inspire you?
I wouldn't see it as a glamour position. I would see it as a worthwhile position that you were able to do something and you were not completely lost.
The Battle of Britain was the first major campaign to be fought entirely in the air. The conflict raged over southern England for 3 months, involving over 2,900 RAF aircrew. It was the first Allied turning point of the Second World War and a defining moment in world history. The German plan to beat the RAF had failed, and so too had the invasion of Great Britain.
You know, for many people, as an airfield, Biggin Hill is hallowed ground. Throughout the war, its squadrons and its pilots of all nationalities that were based here destroyed over 1,000 enemy aircraft. Its personnel collected over 200 awards for gallantry and skill in combat, but it is perhaps that summer of 1940 and its role in the Battle of Britain itself that has enshrined its place in the history books.
The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion.